Welcome back to Two Pretty Good Bad Men, an Alias Smith & Jones podcast. I'm your benevolent host, Tabitha, and today we're covering episode 10, The Man Who Murdered Himself. You guys, this is the last separation episode. Celebrate! We did it! Well, technically there's one more, but I don't count that one because it's, good and it feels natural and it's not so obvious what's going on. And we'll get there in a couple of weeks. This episode was shot in mid to late February 1971, and it aired on March 18th, 1971. The story was by Roy Huggins, and the teleplay was by both him and Robert Hamner. It was directed by Jeffrey Hayden. This is Robert Hamner's last episode of the series. He previously wrote Exit from Wickenburg and A Fistful of Diamonds. Farewell, Mr. Hamner. Your contributions were truly appreciated. We're also familiar with director Jeffrey Hayden by now. He's already directed The Wrong Train to Brimstone and A Fistful of Diamonds. Hey, A Fistful of Diamonds and this episode were both a Hamner-Hayden team-up. That's kinda neat. We'll be keeping Mr. Hayden until the bitter end, and I do mean the bitter end. Since we know all of our creatives this week, let's move on to the guest stars, and I promise there aren't as many this week as there were last week. We've got Patrick Macnee as Norman Alexander. His biggest claim to fame was starring in The Avengers, not the Marvel one, the British spy one, with my wife, Diana Rigg. He left England for the United States in the 50s to pursue better acting roles. He was in the Thunder in Paradise movies, which was meant to be a series, but didn't make it, so it ended up as movies instead. Think a cross between Baywatch and The A-Team, starring Hulk Hogan. Macnee felt typecast after The Avengers, but he did continue to work up until 2003. Next is Juliette Mills as Julia Finney, and as of this recording, she's still alive and working. In fact, she just did 5 episodes of Grey's Anatomy. She did a lot of guest work on shows like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Fantasy Island, and The Love Boat, and her biggest break came in the soap opera Passions. I think that was the weird supernatural one. I don't know. I didn't watch soaps. She was on that show for nearly 1,000 episodes, and her character's name? Tabitha. Yay! We also have Charles Davis as Kevin Finney. He did a lot of TV work as well. He did episodes of Highway to Heaven, Murder, She Wrote, L.A. Law, Knight Rider, and Remington Steele. He did 4 episodes of The Wild Wild West and 7 of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. In addition to acting, he was a writer and director. He wrote and directed the movie Happy as the Grass Was Green, starring Geraldine Page and Pat Hingle. He wrote 2 episodes of the series Death Valley Days, and he wrote the movie The Violent Ones that was directed and starred Fernando Lamas. It all comes full circle. Next is Maurice Hill as Miles Parker. He had bit parts in both the Airplane movies. He guest starred on Trapper John, Alice, Shaft, Macmillan and Wife, and Get Smart. He was in the TV movie The Scarlett O'Hara War, which was all about the fervor about the casting of the perfect Scarlett O'Hara for the Gone with the Wind movie, and how every actress in Hollywood and outside of Hollywood wanted that role. And Tony Curtis played David O. Selznick. That just seems kind of odd. Anyway, Mr. Hill will pop up in an uncredited role in another ASJ episode later on. Finally, in one scene, we have Slim Pickens as the sheriff. And we've already seen him in Exit from Wickenburg, and we'll see him again in a couple more episodes. Also, we have a couple returning Devil's Hole Gang members. Dennis Fimple is back as Kyle, Bill McKinney as Lobo, and a new one, Hank, played by Harry Northup. Next time he shows up, he's playing a different character. And without further ado, let's get into the episode. Our sneak peek is Kyle and a few other Devil's Hole members confronting Hayes about being in their territory. Hayes tells them that he's a guide for a group hunting for 7-feet-tall, red-headed Native Americans. I like seeing Kyle again. After the opening credits, our boys are carefully loading some explosives onto a wagon. They're transporting it to some miners who need it, and Hayes is complaining about the job. Apparently the kid found this one. Kid defends himself and reminds him that they get $200 when the job is over. Now I know that was $3 million back then, but it's a fraction of what they've been offered before, and for what seems like a very big risk on their parts. I'm going to be shallow for a moment because Hayes is once again all bundled up in his gray coat and hat, and truly he's never cuter to me than when he's dressed like this. I don't know, it's the dark colors and the coat is looks just a tiny bit big on him, so he looks so slight and adorable. Sorry about that. They slowly take off in the wagon, and I love the way Hayes whispers, "Giddy up," to the horses, like if he speaks too loudly, the dynamite will explode. Before they can get out of town, Kid reads about another job in the paper that he'd rather do. An archaeologist, which Kid pronounced archeologist, needs a guide to the Devil's Hole area, and that guide will get $30 a day, plus a bonus if the mission is successful. The guide must know the area and be proficient with firearms. And even Hayes doesn't know what an archeologist is, which is kind of rare for Hayes not to know something like that. Kid argues that Hayes should deliver the dynamite alone, and Kid will take the guide job and get more money. But Hayes wants the guide job. So they flip a coin, and a general rule for this show is that the Kid never wins coin tosses. I don't know why he keeps agreeing to them. At least Hayes lets him inspect this coin first to make sure it's legit. Cut to poor Kid driving the wagon alone. Honestly, I think the dynamite story would have made for a good episode all on its own. They could have gotten a lot of tension and suspense out of that. It's a shame they wasted it on what can barely be described as a B plot. It's more like a Z plot. Now, originally this was switched. Hi, Scully. My doggy. Kid was going to take the guide job, and Hayes would take the dynamite. I don't know why they switched parts. I'm guessing it was a scheduling thing, since it would make more sense to send Kid on the archaeology job. He's the gunslinger, after all. Hayes meets with the archaeologist, Mr. Alexander. The man questions Hayes to see if he's qualified, and Hayes draws a very, very crude map of the area to prove that he does know it. The trees aren't bad, but the lake and the mountains? Don't get into art, Hayes. Hayes says that if they go through the actual Devil's Hole camp, they'll need an army. Oh my god, Hayes. Stop trying to make them sound like badasses. We know by now that they are not. Any gang that would have Kyle in it is not a gang to be feared. Besides, you're not even in that gang anymore. Why do you care if people are afraid of them or not? His map roughly matches the one that Alexander found in San Francisco. Now he just needs proof that Hayes can shoot. So he throws a can up in the air, and Hayes actually does manage to hit it. Good for him. I'm impressed. I guess he's a good shot in his own right, but never has to prove it because the Kid's always there. He gets the job and is introduced to the other members of the expedition, Mr. Parker and Mr. and Mrs. Finney. Mrs. Finney is giving Hayes eyes instantly, and I can't blame her. He is the youngest and the hottest guy there. We get another bit of canon for Hayes that he's never been east of the Mississippi River. I don't remember if it's been stated yet, but the Kid definitely has, so they were apart at some point. Hayes finally asks why they want to go to the Devil's Hole country. Alex says that he and Mr. Parker just got to this country, and that when they got the map, a story came with it. That a tribe of huge giants with flaming red hair used to roam the territory. Okay, I did a dive on this. This is a real legend. Like, there are books about it. It's a whole thing you can go down a rabbit hole on. I tried to just get the surface facts so as not to derail us too much, but it is interesting. The legend of this tribe, called, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Sitka, comes from the Paiute tribe in Nevada. In Paiute language, Sitka means tool eaters. They were called this because they wove rafts made out of water plant called tool to escape attacks around Lake, Lahontan. That lake no longer exists. According to the legends, the Sitka tribe would attack the Paiutes all the time, and eventually the rest of the tribes in the area gathered to defeat them, drove the few survivors into what today is known as Lovelock Cave, and when they refused to come out of the cave, the Paiutes and their allies set fire to the mouth of the cave, burning and suffocating the Sitkas. And that was the extinction of their tribe. In fact, Sarah Winnemucca, a Paiute and a writer, mentioned them in her book, Life Among the Paiutes, Their Wrongs and Claims. You may know of Sarah Winnemucca because she was reduced to one of Little Joe's conquests on Bonanza. Awesome. She refers to a tribe of, quote, barbarians who would raid the Paiute village and carry off people to eat, end quote. She goes on to mention a mourning dress that she owned that was made from the Sitka's distinctive red hair. She does not mention them being giants, however, The cave was rediscovered in 1911, and the archaeologists did uncover thousands of specimens like tools, bones, and weapons. The giant portion of the legend comes from some uncovered remains in the cave that were reported to be over 8 feet tall. But if those remains really existed, they are gone now. Studies of other remains in the cave measure about 6 feet tall, and some claim that the red hair is from staining in the earth that happened after death. But there was a 15-inch sandal found in the cave. There was also supposedly a handprint on the wall of the cave, twice the size of the average human hand. Now, I'm not an archaeologist, anthropologist, or historian, but this is all really fascinating to me. Give it a goog sometime. And that ends our history lesson. Let's get back to the fun cowboy show, shall we? That night, Hayes is called down to the sheriff's office. He's understandably nervous, but attempts to bluff his way through the meeting. The sheriff first wants to know how Hayes knows about the Devil's Hole territory. Hayes spins a tale about how he heard a rumor of gold in the area, so he spent a few months there looking for gold and didn't find anything. He said he saw the Devil's Hole gang, but they never bothered him. The sheriff believes him, and he says that Hayes and Curry are two of the orneriest critters that the good Lord ever sent among them. Yeah, sure they are. The town doctor comes in, and Pete does a nice bit of physical acting here. He stands up from his chair, trying to make an exit. The sheriff says they're not done yet, so Pete just kind of circles the chair and sits right back down. I'm not describing it well, but it's a cute moment. Next, he questions Hayes about the party he's traveling with. Hayes says he doesn't really care as long as he's getting his $30 a day. The doctor cuts in and lets Hayes know that something weird is up with them. The party didn't arrive together. The Finneys were meant to be going to Boston. Mrs. Finney was supposedly ill, but the doctor couldn't find anything wrong with her. And once the couple heard about Alexander's expedition, she suddenly got better. Sounds like me as a kid when I didn't want to go to school that day. And by that day, I of course mean every day. He also claims that he's an amateur archaeologist, and he can tell that Alexander isn't one. Alexander invited a bunch of people around town to join the party, and they all turned him down. Hayes doesn't let any of this deter him. The sheriff says he felt he had to warn him, but if he insists on continuing anyway, he can't expect any further help from him. I guess Hayes is just thinking about the money at this point and thinks whatever else is going on, he can handle it. Personally, I'd cut my losses and take off. Cut to the kids still riding along, spurring the horses on up a steep hill, and we get all these fast close-ups of the dynamite as if it's really gonna explode. They're not even playing suspenseful music. It's like gentle, playful music. And he doesn't whisper to the horses, he shouts at them. Hayes leads the party into the Devil's Hole territory, and it's not long before some of the gang spot them. The party gets nervous, but Hayes isn't, naturally. He says he'll ride up and talk to them on their behalf. Alexander offers him a $100 bonus if he's brave enough to actually do so. Easy money. He rides up to Kyle, Lobo, and some guy named Hank. Kyle brings up what happened with Big Jim Santana, so that's a point for continuity. But he's actually not mad at him. They say that Wheat's back, and they're back to doing small-time crimes. I would love to know what happened with Wheat leaving and coming back. But we never will. Hayes tells him what he's doing there, and Hank says he's heard those legends too. Hayes kindly asks them if they could just kind of stay out of the way and let them be. Kyle says they'll keep an eye on them, but they won't interfere. Back to Kid doing the same thing he was doing before. Riveting. But this time he falls off the wagon and then blames the horses. Those horsies are doing their best, Kid. Back at the party, everyone is having dinner except for Hayes. He's kind of hanging back, and Julia Finney goes over to join him because she is so horny for him. She ever so subtly asks if he'll lead her to the river so she can cool down. Girl, please, you're not subtle. He takes her, and we're in some pretty bad day for night again. She keeps pretending to trip so he'll take her hand. And this might all seem like I'm annoyed with her, but I'm not. I'd do the same thing. I want Hayes too. He keeps calling her Mrs. Finney instead of Julia to remind himself to keep his hands off. And the next day, Alexander splits everyone off into groups. Julia wants to go with Hayes and ditches her husband yet again. But Mr. Finney is oddly cool with it. Everyone rides off, and we cut back to the kid still struggling along, and now his wagon is stuck in the mud. I love how he says whoa to the horses after they've already stopped. because, they're stuck in the mud. You didn't have to say that, kid. Alexander is watching Mr. Parker from afar, kind of following him, and then he pulls his rifle out. He can't get a good shot at that moment, though. Hayes and Julia take a rest, and Hayes starts to question her about her husband. He tells her he doesn't believe that she's really married to Mr. Finney. In fact, he doesn't believe that she and Mr. Finney are together at all. He hits her with the info about the supposed illness and miraculous recovery that she had on the train. Julia says whatever is wrong with the expedition, she's not a part of it. She does admit that she's not married to Mr. Finney. So, it's cool that she's been ditching him. It's fine. Sincerely, there's no cheating going on. She was broke and needed money for the train back home to Boston. Mr. Finney offered her the money plus some extra if she would play along as his wife. She says he's been a perfect gentleman to her, but she doesn't know why he wanted that or what he's up to. Hayes believes her. She's glad it's out in the open, so now Hayes won't think she's a, and I quote, hussy. Then they kiss and possibly have sex, since the camera just pans away as they lower each other to the ground. Meanwhile, Kid gets his wagon unstuck. Good for him. Also, since it's the Kid who usually gets the girls of the week, I'm kind of enjoying him having a miserable time while Hayes gets some romance. That night, the party is gathered at camp again. Mr. Finney asks if the gang is really dangerous, and this time Hayes says he never really knew them, so he wouldn't know. Finney replies like he's possibly on to Hayes. Dun dun dun. The next day, they split up again, and this time, Hayes and Julia find a cave and go inside. They're actually excited, and it's cute. They're not archaeologists, and Hayes knows that this isn't really about finding proof of red-headed giants, but they're still excited about the prospect of finding something anyway. It makes sense for Hayes since he loves learning new things, and I like this side of him. They come across a very large skeleton. Hayes lies down next to it and asks how much taller she thinks the skeleton is. She says, quote, 6 or 7 inches, or 10 or 11. Girl, can't you measure? Me neither. Then she finds a tuft of red hair. They cannot believe it and venture further into the cave. Hayes finds a piece of red rawhide and concludes that something must be in the ground turning things red. So the tribe probably didn't have red hair, but they were tall. When they emerge from the cave, they hear a gunshot, and we see Alexander smile smugly and put down his rifle. Mr. Parker is dead. Alexander takes his boot off and puts what looks like papers inside and then slides the boot back on the poor dead guy. The rest of the party arrives and Alexander is like, oh no, look what the Devil's Hole gang did. Mr. Smith, this is your fault. Oh. They cover the body and then eat lunch like 10 feet away. Ew. Hayes finds the papers that Alexander put in Parker's boot. They say that his identity wasn't Parker, but Stephen Ashdown, and he's from Sussex, England. Mr. Finney asks to take a closer look. Julia says the man gave his life for the expedition, and they should bury him in the cave. Julia, what? I mean, seriously, what, girl? Hayes is just like, or we could go back to town. He pulls his gun and tells Alexander and Finney that one of them killed Parker. He knows the Devil's Hole gang wouldn't shoot a man in the back and then run. I love that he pushes to make them sound scary and dangerous, but he's also protective of their honor. Alexander asks why either of them would want to kill him. Hayes shrugs that he doesn't know, and he doesn't really care, but they're going back to town anyway. He walks away and Julia follows him. She's scared and she's going to stick by Hayes because she only feels safe with him. Makes sense. He's the only one she knows for certain didn't kill Parker since they were together when he was killed. The two of them discuss which one is the killer, and then more gunshots interrupt them. Finney and Alexander are engaged in a firefight. Finney manages to shoot Alexander in the chest just as Hayes shows up, with Julia following close behind. And Hayes is like, okay dude, what the fuck? Finney spills his story. Finney is actually a Scotland Yard agent. Alexander, not Parker, is the real Stephen Ashdown, and he worked for T.F. Ayres. Remember, it's the not Tiffany's of the ASJ universe. He ended up stealing $2 million in stone. $2 million? What is that? An actual billion in today's money? Holy crap! His orders were to find him, not arrest him, just stay with him until he could lead him to the jewels. Well, that's not going to happen since he's dead now. Hayes doesn't believe him because why would he ask him to join the party? Simply, he was asking everyone to join him so he could have witnesses to his own death. He killed Parker so he could pass him off as Ashdown, and with Ashdown dead, he could get away scot-free. So I guess poor Mr. Parker was a real archaeologist and actually did want to find the lost tribe and was murdered for his troubles. That's really sad. Then there's an abrupt cut to the three of them back in town at the train station. Finney is a gentleman and apologizes for putting Julia through more than he expected to. I like him. Before she gets on the train, she asks if Hayes will ever make his way to Boston. And he kind of bluntly says he won't. And she needs to leave before she tempts him into changing his mind. They actually are kind of sweet together, and I like Julia too. They share a goodbye kiss and she rides out of his life forever. What a hussy. I'm kidding. Finney says he'll start backtracking Ashdown's trail and try to find the jewels. He also says he knows that Hayes isn't quite honest about who he is, and that if he didn't already have an assignment, he'd wonder a lot more about him. As it is, he's choosing to let it go. This is a good contrast to the scene with Sheriff Slim Pickens at the beginning. Both he and Finney talk about how being lawmen makes them good at telling who's lying, only Sheriff bought Hayes' lie hook, line, and sinker, and Finney is genuinely intuitive enough to know that Hayes isn't who he says he is. They shake hands and part. In the tag, the kid, covered in dust, returns to town with all the dynamite delivered and him $200 richer. Hayes gives him a very boisterous welcome back. Aww, I think he really did miss him. Kid is happy that at least it's over and they have $500 now. But Hayes has to break it to him that he didn't get paid. But it's not his fault. I mean, Alexander/Ashdown died. You can't collect money from a dead man. Kid is pretty pissed off and they head into the saloon. The camera stays outside and we can hear Hayes say, "If it'll make you feel any better, hit me." Kid obliges him and end credits. Okay, a great shock to myself, I actually kind of like this one. I know, I can't believe it either. I have been so bored by these episodes, specifically the Great Shell Game and Return to Devil's Hole. But this one was engaging. I liked Julia and Mr. Finney. I liked Hayes' little romance with her. Cutting to the kid struggling with the dynamite was kind of funny sometimes. And I did like the mystery. I wish there had been more time spent on the Sitka tribe, because it is absolutely fascinating. But, oh well. And that is it for the separation episodes. We did it, you guys. We did it. Don't thank me. I'm no hero. I put my pants on one leg at a time, just like the rest of you. The line of the episode goes to Hayes. When he's confronting Julie about everyone's lies, he says, "No one's who they say they are. Except me." And the episode goes to Hayes. Sure, he didn't get paid, and he didn't even really affect the plot. Finney did all the work in the end. What did he really do this episode? You know what, never mind. The episode goes to the kid. At least he finished his job and got paid. Next time on Alias Smith & Jones, Pete Duell is reunited with an old co-star, and Hayes meets his match when the boys clash with a woman just as clever and ambitious for money as they are. Research for this podcast comes mainly from the wonderful book Alias Smith & Jones, The Story of Two Pretty Good Bad Men, by Sandra K. Segala and Joanne M. Bagwell. Additional research on the Sitka legend comes from the articles The Sitka, Legendary Ginger Cannibals of the United States, by Joseph Green, and Lovelock Cave, A Tale of Giants or a Giant Tale of Fiction, by Brian Hill. Thanks for listening.